Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this session titled Grassroots to Governance, Building Political Impact for Palestine. I'm Safwan Masri, I'm the Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar, and I'm delighted to have with me on the stage two remarkable individuals. To my left is Diana Bhutto, who's a Palestinian lawyer and former advisor to the Palestinian negotiation team. She is currently a practitioner in residence at Georgetown University in Qatar. And Fadi Quran, who's a Palestinian organizer and senior director at Avaz, working where grassroots mobilization meets global civic pressure. We will discuss where the Palestinian voice is in decisions about their future. Oftentimes, that voice is missing from conversations that are had, including here at Doha Forum, some of the conversations that we've been part of. But to transport ourselves into Palestine, anyone who is Palestinian and 37 years or younger has never had the chance to vote for a Palestinian president or official. An entire generation has come of political age with the most basic democratic act missing long enough to feel almost mythical. The political clock has been ticking, but without hands. That kind of absence would corrode any system. At this moment, it is ruinous. We often imagine that power collapses only when it is confronted, but power also collapses when it is never confronted at all. Uninterrupted rule hardens into habit. Habit turns into entitlement, and entitlement settles into a kind of bureaucratic afterlife. Institutions built to carry a national project forward begin to encase it instead. Yet political life does not vanish when official politics are co-opted. It relocates, it finds different routes. It shows up where formal authority cannot fully reach or sanitize it. In villages, defending their land through organizing. In municipal struggles that are small only to those not living inside them. In youth networks and diaspora campaigns that behave like a republic in exile, improvising representation where none is granted. The question is no longer whether Palestinians have leaders. We do. The question is, what kind of leadership emerges now? Accountable to whom? Grounded where? With what skills, moral authority, and strategic imagination? Capable of carrying a national project larger than any faction, older than any institution, and more geographically dispersed than any Palestinian generation has had to hold together. What would it look like for legitimacy to rise again from below? How do we address this in the context of an illegitimate Palestinian authority that is supported by Arab countries, US and Israel, the context of a recognition of a Palestinian state, the Trump plan, and Palestinian prisoners? Can we explore a third way beyond the PA and Hamas as representatives of the Palestinian people? How could grassroots mechanisms generate legitimate political leadership? What does liberation, Palestine, nationhood mean across 1948, the West Bank and Gaza? And can we rethink political futures beyond tired two-state, one-state status quo framing? These are some of the questions that we will try to address within the next 40 minutes or so. And I'm going to start with you, Fadi, if it's okay with the two of you. Let's talk about the type of leadership that is needed today, given that Palestinians are scattered, face different challenges. There are current obstacles to that leadership. What kind of leadership is needed? And why is the current political system incapable of producing that kind of leadership? What happens in an environment when There's a legitimacy crisis. There's a generation that has not had any experience with democracy. When we are trapped, if you will, in succession plans. And, how do we reframe? How do we get out of this? What kind of leadership do we need? And for whom? I mean, leadership over a geography, leadership over a state, or leadership for a people, 14 million of them around the world, including in the historic land of Palestine.
Thank you, Dr. Safwan, and it's an honor to be here with you today and with Diana and of course with this wonderful audience. And I want to start by saying that today is a special day because it's the 38th anniversary of the First Intifada. And that was actually one of the historical examples in the context of Palestine where after the massacres in Sabra and Shatila, over 20 to 30,000 Palestinians and Lebanese killed across Israeli attacks and incursion, Palestinians just 6 years later launched an intifada that forced Israel in the corner and forced it to make concessions and reminded the world that we are a people that never give up, no matter what happens to us. And I think to answer your question, what this moment calls for is a competent, capable, representative, honest, credible Palestinian leadership that can take us from over a century of ongoing Nakba, ongoing genocide, ongoing apartheid, and help us enter the decade of liberation. And I want to speak to the fact that through my work and through engagement and even looking out in this audience, Palestinian leadership is present and I would say uncanny. I mean, Gaza and the people in Gaza would not have survived and we wouldn't know what was happening inside Gaza without the heroes on the ground there that have found ways under impossible circumstances to stay steadfast and to survive a genocide. In the West Bank, there are hundreds of villages under attack every day by violent settlers. Those villages would not be standing without there being Palestinians there defending them. And if you look at Palestinian skills in the diaspora, one of the key leaders of one of the top AI companies, Replit, the founder of it, the CEO of it, in the field of AI is a Palestinian, Amjad Mas'ad. If you look at a lot of the costs, Israel has had to, or 40,000 Israeli companies were forced to leave Israel and re-register in the United States because of the mass sanctions campaign. And this is not to mention the fact that you have fighters on the ground in the tunnels in Gaza that faced the most powerful military in the world, and it couldn't defeat them, it couldn't end them. And the genocide is ongoing, we're facing genocide by attrition, but in no way has Israel achieved any type of victory against the Palestinian people. So the question I think that we need to all try and answer collectively together is how do we ensure this high caliber of Palestinians everywhere actually take the helm of the Palestinian liberation movement? And a lot of times the argument is made that there should be an attempt for new generation of Palestinians, and by new generation, I mean new generation of thinking. I mean, we have many multiple generations of Palestinians that are capable leaders. Dr. Mustafa Barghouti was in the audience. You have many Palestinian organizers in the audience that I know. But the key question was always, should they take over the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or should they engage in the PA? And I want to change the framework a little bit before handing it to you, Diana, which is to say, oftentimes the thinking is you need to have something to be able to do something, to be able to be something. And what I mean by that is, you need to have the levers of power or control the institutions to be able to do certain things that help us move towards the liberation of Palestine so that you can become the liberation movement. And I want to challenge us all in the room to do the opposite. Let's start, and many have already done that, by being the Palestinian liberation movement that's needed for this moment, fulfilling the gaps that our people need and that the global community needs from Palestine, and doing the necessary tasks required for liberation movement to do, which we can speak to. And by being and doing, we will eventually have and take control of the levers of power and the representation that is needed. And so I'll stop there and hand back to you, but we can discuss that more.
Thank you, Fadi. That's a very healthy way to look at it, right? tip it on its head and start with a clean slate, right? I mean, if I understood you correctly, you know, let's think of the liberation movement, right, and see how that leads us towards leadership and towards structures and so on, rather than try to dismantle existing structures. So let me take that and turn it over to you, Diana. That requires that there are mechanisms for hearing Palestinian voices. And I know from discussions that we've had and from some of the things that you've said and written, that there are conscious attempts to quash Palestinian voices, that the Palestinian Authority is active in that. It's more than complicit, right? The US, Israel, and so on. The Trump plan may be also facilitating the division of Palestine. Can we talk about that? I mean, take Fadi's point, see if you agree with it, and perhaps talk about how do we get started with that, given all the efforts to erase Palestinian voices and quash them.
Thank you. First, I also want to begin by thanking you, Dean Masri, and also you, Fadi. It's really a delight to have to share a stage with you, and thank you all for being here today. It's been remarkable being here and to see all of you here today. You know, in order to answer the question, I do want to build upon what Fadi said, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I want to say that, you know, oftentimes when people think of leadership, they're just simply looking at this idea of political leadership. And political leadership is indeed important. But there are forms of leadership that are equally important. But to answer your specific question, the question of political leadership, Israel has gone after political leaders. They've done everything from assassinate political leaders to imprison political leaders. Right now, as we speak, Marwan Barghouti has been in jail for 23 years. There's a Free Marwan Now campaign that has been ongoing in order to demand his release. It's important to keep in mind that he was imprisoned and put on trial in a court that that lawyers around the world have deemed to be unjust. He was tried in an Israeli court, which he should not have been. The court procedures were unjust. He himself refused to recognize the jurisdiction of that court, and he shouldn't have recognized the jurisdiction of that court. And yet we still are in a place where nobody has been pushing internationally for his release, and we should be. He is our Nelson Mandela, and it's time for people to be recognizing that and for people to be pushing for his release. He's not the only one, by the way. He's not the only one. There are thousands of Palestinians who are currently languishing in Israeli prisons, and it's time for all of them to be released. Right? But beyond the people who Israel has assassinated and those who are currently in prison, there's also been attempts by others to go after Palestinian voices and to choose who Palestinian leaders are. And we see this now with the Trump plan that has come into place. We've seen that it's as though we're turning the clock back in time. You know, as we pushed forward for decolonization around the world, when it comes to Gaza, the clock has turned backwards. If you look at this current UN Security Council resolution, which has enshrined the Trump plan, what it's effectively saying is that the person who is in charge of Gaza is President Trump. How is that proper? A man who was never elected by Palestinians, I'm pretty sure he's never been there. How is it that President Trump has become the person who's in charge of Gaza? And it's a chairman of the Board of Peace. You know, and it's because we're still in the world where people don't see that Palestinians have a right to freedom. And again, it's totally absurd that we're still in this world where Palestinians have to prove to the world that they are entitled to their freedom. Whereas we should be asking, why is it that Israel's not being held to account for committing genocide? Why is it that Palestinians are continually having to prove that they have a right to their freedom? So looking at this, we're in a place now where we are both grappling with President Trump being the head of the Board of Peace, other people coming in and being the subs to the head of the Board of Peace, another set of people who are going to be appointed, again, no input by Palestinians, to be in charge of Gaza, and so on, and so on, and so on. And where are Palestinian voices in that? And at the same time, we have all of these states that are lining up to, or not lining up, that have recognized Palestine. And it's still not clear to me how it is that these two can be reconciled. How can you recognize a state on the one hand and be allowing Israel to be eating up that state, and then at the same time be recognizing that state and have President Trump be the head of the Board of Peace? You either recognize the state and recognize that people have a right to be free, or you're playing a simple game. And I believe that they're simply playing a game. They're throwing Palestinians a cookie and saying, we're really sorry that you experienced genocide for the past 2 years. Here's the cookie that you get, and let's move on.
And where does that lead us?
Where that leads us is exactly the place that Fadi has mentioned, which is we do have leaders. We do have leaders all around the world. We have leaders in Palestine. We have leaders in 48 Palestine. We have leaders in Gaza. We have leaders in the West Bank. We have leaders all throughout the world. And it's our role now to be coming together, to be focusing on our political leadership, but our leadership, once again, isn't just political.
So let me challenge that, challenge all of us here. We've been saying this. We've been saying this for a while. We've been saying this certainly over the past couple of years. The three of us were part of the major conference we did on Palestine here in Doha almost a year and a half ago. Has there been any movement? I mean, there was I guess, the National Congress that was held here earlier this year. As I was discussing it with one of our respected colleagues just yesterday, he noted to me that he didn't think there was anybody under 50 amongst the 1,000 or so people who were there. Have there been any other attempts? How do we get from the rhetoric to proper seeking of that leadership? I mean, I look at people like Fadi, like you're on the ground, you're in Ramallah, and you're exceptional, but you're also not exceptional, okay? You're not exceptional. No, you're exceptional as a human being, and I love you very dearly. In that sense, you are exceptional, but you're not exceptional in that there are many young women and men like you, and as Diana said, all over the land and elsewhere. How do we ensure that you are there, taking on leadership roles? To Diana's point, that your voices are heard. How do we get past the rhetoric? Either of you. Yeah, please start, okay. Diana. Yeah.
For me, it's a question of people's ears changing. Because once people start listening to us with the proper ear, then they'll hear us. I think it's that people are just so hung up on listening to only certain voices. And those certain voices are the political leadership that is enshrined in Ramallah, mainly the Palestinian Authority. Despite the fact that, as you mentioned in your opening, that the Palestinian Authority has not had elections since 2005 for the president and 2006 for the parliament.
So it became illegitimate in 2009, right?
Not at all. Again, it expired in 2000. Mahmoud Abbas's term expired in 2009, and then the parliament's term expired in 2010. Yeah. Right, and once again, that obsession with looking at just the PA and both the president and the parliament is really just focusing on 22% of Palestine. It's ignoring people like me. It's ignoring people like you. So I think when we start changing the way that we're listening, the ear that we're listening with, and start listening with a different ear to what the vast majority of Palestinians that aren't the 22%, then we'll hear something very different.
Fadi?
I mean, adding to what Diana said, I also want to say, first of all, one of the things that makes me most proud to be a Palestinian is actually how many exceptional Palestinians there are, men and women, many more than me, many more than there are in this room. It's truly a wonderful society that I think people have not just grasped the beauty and power and purity of our society. So it almost brings me down to tears just to think of how many people there are and how much they've gone through and how strong they are. And the question you're asking, Safwan, is a very dangerous question in terms of the renaissance of Palestinian leadership. It's not something I would say even comfortable to discuss in front of cameras. And the reason I say that, not to scare anyone in the room, but let's speak honestly. Who has an interest in there being a powerful, credible, inspiring, transformative Palestinian leadership? Are any Middle Eastern governments interested in seeing something like that? Unfortunately not. The Israelis, for them, that's an existential threat. The Western world, not the United States, not Europe. In fact, the reason a lot of this work in terms of building leadership is not seen by many is not because there are not leaders there, it's because if you do it and you take it seriously, you have to build power and strength underground until you're capable of showing yourself and not being totally crushed. Because everything we're seeing right now in Palestine, the Israelis have failed to physically, to biologically erase the Palestinian people. So they're now engaged in a strategy that I would call genocide by attrition plus politicide. They couldn't erase us biologically, but they want to erase our presence politically. And this is happening everywhere. You can start with Gaza, this board of peace. Apart from Trump, who's going to be his vice chair? Tony Blair. I mean, have we not learned anything from the British mandate 100 years ago and what it got us here? Apart from that, though, put Gaza aside and this whole dangerous plan that they have for Gaza, the West Bank. The French government has drafted a law to be signed by President Mahmoud Abbas that basically says you cannot launch or be a political party in Palestine unless you adhere to President Abbas's political beliefs. Doesn't say that directly, but it says you have to adhere to the PLO's commitments. De facto, no Palestinian political party, whether it's the leftist parties, whether it's Al-Mubadara, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti's party, no party apart from Fatah will be able to exist under Palestinian society. Even worse, the French have pushed an effort to draft a Palestinian constitution that Macron and his group with some EU officials have gotten to see and read and comment on before any Palestinian citizen. Why is all of this being done? Let's also remember, Palestinians in 1948, you can speak about all the forms of discrimination they're facing. And I want to say, when I say Palestinian, I mean all 15 million Palestinians across the world. It's unity of people. I also mean, and this may be controversial, but there are now many other people who are Palestinian, maybe not by DNA, but by cause. But consequently, where I want to take this to is this act of politicide, this very strategic effort. If you're a college student in the US, a young Palestinian leader, we want to destroy you. If you're a Palestinian civil society organization, we want to sanction you. They are attempting to destroy any and all forms of political agency. And so if you're building a renaissance of Palestinian leadership and taking it seriously, you can't just come out anywhere and say, oh, here are the new leaders of Palestine. They will be crushed. Marwan Barghouti is the example of that. With the launch of his campaign, what did the Israeli prison authorities decide to do? Take him back into the torture chamber. Any hope, any idea of new Palestinian leadership is under attack. And so to do this work, you need to build power quietly. You need to engage very proactively. It's a very difficult task, but it's one thing that if we want to see not just Palestine freed, but this wound to humanity, that is this ethno-supremacy, settler colonialism that's harming so many people, not inside Palestine alone, but abroad. For it to end, we need to be very strategic, proactive, and think 3 steps forward.
Let's take that and break it down. Really, let's be concrete about how we do it. And let me, perhaps as you're thinking about this, I made reference earlier to some of the sessions held here, which are, not exceptional, right? But one, Fadi, you and I were at, there must have been 30 people in the room. And I looked around and, this was about sort of the Trump plan, what's next for Palestinians, UN Resolution 2803. But I looked around the room and yes, there were a couple of people like me, right? Palestinians, but diaspora, I would consider. Maybe at most there were 3 Palestinians who live there, right? Otherwise, it is well-meaning people, one would assume, right? Speaking on behalf of the Palestinians, determining what's best for Palestinians. Now, it's one thing when, Macron or France does that or Trump does that, but it's another when, we're within the region are doing that. So how do we get from here to there? Please.
Unfortunately, we've gotten used to people speaking on our behalf.
Right. How do we get unused to it?
We have to push. We have to push. Look, I want to go back to the Trump plan because I think it's really important. When it came to this Trump plan, which actually, let's be clear, it's actually an Israeli plan that's been branded as a Trump plan. It really is. Okay.
I mean, is there a distinction whenever we talk, whether you say the U.S. plan or the Israeli plan, there hardly is a distinction anyway, right?
No, this one,
this one specifically.
This is definitely an Israeli plan with that has been branded as a Trump plan. And the reason that I'm saying this is because if you look at all of the aspects of it, it gives Israel such a veto and all of the guarantees and nothing for Palestinians. And at its core, it aims at the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is what Netanyahu said from the very beginning. If you recall, and I'm sure many of you do recall, one of the very first things that Netanyahu said was that at the end of this, Gaza is going to be smaller in size and thinner in population. Right now, it's smaller in size and thinner in population. And just a few days ago, the Israelis announced that Rafah crossing, which is the only way to get in and out of Gaza at this point in time, is going to be opened in one direction only, and you can guess which direction, which is out. All right. So this is totally an Israeli plan that has been branded as a Trump plan. But even going to the specifics of it, what was important about this was that this was a plan where Trump made sure to get everybody involved, except for Palestinians. And so much so that Mahmoud Abbas wasn't even invited to the spectacle, farce, whatever it was, at Sharm el-Sheikh. And when he was eventually invited to Sharm el-Sheikh, he had, and I counted it, a 90-second interaction with Trump. 90 seconds. That's it. 90 seconds. And when the plan was announced, he was among the first to welcome the plan. Even though the plan at its core says no Palestinian Authority is going to be in place, and if we behave, if we're nice, if you're good people, and if you reform to the way that we like, that we want the reforms done, even though it's not really clearly specified what the reforms are and to what extent, and when we are finally satisfied where the reforms are, we may just simply recognize that you have an aspiration to a pathway to a state. All right, and so all of this is to say, and yet through this, Palestinian Authority accepted all of this. Why? Because even he has gotten used to people speaking on his behalf. How do we break through this? is that this is the place where we can no longer be in a place where we're accepting this. And that was the whole point of what happened over the course of the past 2 years. It was disruption. The point was to disrupt, to make sure that we are the ones who are making our voices heard. And that's what we have to do. It's got to be a question of disruption, of making our voices heard. It can't just be any longer that we're, a room with 30 people, maybe well-intentioned, maybe not, are the ones who are deciding on our behalf.
We cannot be complicit in that process.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And this is, but we are at this point. We are at this point.
We are complicit when we partake in it.
Absolutely. Look, one of the worst things to ever happen to us was Oslo. One of the worst things to ever happen, because as Fadi began in his opening remarks by saying, was that we were on a path through the first Intifada to getting to a place where we were, because we were disrupting, and yet it got turned on its head when everything got turned into some sort of peace process and all these other voices got involved.
Thank you. Fadi, I see you noting a lot of things. You have a lot to say to respond to this.
No, actually, not much to say, apart from the fact that to the conversation you and I attended and a few others, it's clear, and sometimes by people who are well-intentioned, that it's very easy for them to fall into the path of complicity with the politicide of Palestinian people. And I want to name, because I know some of these people in this room, some of these people are diplomats, and I say it from the heart, not in a judgmental way. Reconsider how you engage around Palestinian politics to ensure that you are standing on the right side of history. Truthfully, take that to heart, because a genocide doesn't end with a ceasefire. Genocides end when three things happen: when there's justice, when the people who were harmed get reparations and are allowed to heal with dignity, and when the ideology responsible for that genocide is dismantled. And this has yet to happen, but I promise you it will happen. And I say it will happen because one of the reasons they're engaging in the politicide of the Palestinian people is they just realize how strong our cause has been. I mean, I do a lot of social media research with the organization I'm with. 1 billion independent accounts across the world supported Palestine consistently and posted about it. That's close to 1 billion people. There's no cause in the world that has that much support, not even Taylor Swift or the World Cup. Truthfully, there's nothing as big as Palestine right now. The amount of people that have donated money to support the Palestinian cause, to support Gaza, it's in the tens of billions. Even in Saudi Arabia, at the beginning of the genocide, when they opened a public platform for Saudis to donate to Gaza, 2 billion riyals in 2 weeks were donated. And that's just from the people of Saudi. So across this region and across the world, Palestine is just pulsing in people's veins. And so consequently, I think, for me, those rooms are unfortunate. I think they're an attempt to take and weaken our power, but they're also inconsequential. I think the real thing we should be discussing is how do we turn all of that real, tangible power into structured, proactive action. And if we figure that out, many of the people in those rooms will be coming to us to ask how to advise us in liberating Palestine. And that's where I would focus most of our energy.
Thank you. And that's exactly where I'm struggling, right? And I'm trying, and I know we all are, trying to figure out, how do we get there? What kind of form does this take? How quietly do you do it, for example, or not, right? How do you establish that network? Leadership, I think, and let me just sort of confirm that with the two of you. We're not talking about structured or structural leadership or state leadership. We're not talking also about individual leadership. We're talking about collective leadership. Yeah, please. Yeah, so how, yeah, so do you do it quietly? Do you do it in a network fashion? How do you, and as you said, there are 15 million of us, but a lot more when you think about Palestinians who are not necessarily Palestinians by ethnicity, but Palestinian by cause. And maybe let me just expand on that a little bit. And, one of the questions that I know we've all been wondering about, especially with the UN Resolution 2803, which according to legal experts, one of them here with us, there's a lot of it's illegal, right? I mean, yesterday I was speaking with a noted legal scholar and wondering whether, this is sort of the end of the international organization that is the UN as we know it. Is there room for the emergence of powers, for example, from the global south? Is there an opportunity here for the international order to be recalibrated for leadership, global leadership perhaps at a mass level to come from without the centers of power from which it had for the past decades? Or is this pie in the sky dreaming? It's an easy question. Yeah.
It's an easy question, but you also like dangerous questions. And I want to be totally transparent.
Sure.
I don't think discussing even the type of structures that we would need to build to be able to give rise to this proactive, movement is something wise to do generally in spaces where there are cell phones and digital devices. So I'll speak very abstractly though, to say that the first thing you want to think about are what are the key levers of engagement that we should all be fulfilling, and how do you get the right people, Palestinians by DNA or by cause, into those different streams of struggle. I would name 4 key streams of struggle to engage with. The first I would start with is strengthening steadfastness, or in Arabic as we say, ta'ziz al-sumud. So you want to think on the ground, where are the key places that need Palestinians to be the most steadfast, and who are the key people on the ground leading those efforts, and how do you resource them, not just financially, but technically, and so forth. And they will become proactive leaders. I mean, the rise of, again, to use Marwan Barghouti's example, or Hanan Ashra, or even Dr. Mustafa, a lot of the names you see rose in the first Intifada. Marwan was a student activist helping students. Dr. Mustafa was working with doctors and organizing doctors' unions. So again, you look at those spaces and you strengthen them and see who's leading within that. The second place to look is who are the key actors engaged in what I would say are the decomposition of Zionist institutions and narrative. There are a lot of wonderful Palestinians. I'm sitting next to one who has done a great job of challenging the Israeli narrative consistently. That's an important part of the work. And so you find Palestinians in those places, help them coordinate, network, figure out how to do that work. The third place I would speak to is, I want to call it making Israel pay a price. The truth is, in Palestine, legitimacy from the Palestinian people starts with who can make Israel pay the highest price for its crimes against us. So who can help us stay most steadfast and who can make Israel pay a price. So you also want to look at Palestinians, and here even the legal efforts, the ICC. I mean, Netanyahu yesterday was crying about the fact that he couldn't visit Germany because he's afraid of being arrested by the ICC. Literally, by the way, watch how he spoke. I was speaking to somebody who works closely with the ICC, and they were overjoyed by the fact that Netanyahu was complaining that he couldn't go to Germany, but he had to bring the German counselor. But there are many ways to ensure Israel pays a price. So you also want to find who are the Palestinians who are working on increasing the cost to Israel and connecting them. And last but not least, and this is something that I and a colleague of mine here named Zaid and others are working on, which is who's actually listening to the Palestinian people. And sometimes, and this is a challenge I give to all of us, sometimes as Palestinians with privilege or who can be in these spaces and places of power, we forget to actually go back to the ground and listen to the mother of martyrs in Jenin, listen to the people picking olives in the villages. And I think you want to look at who are the Palestinians that are actually across Palestinian spaces, going not to prophesize or to be visionary, but actually to just listen to people's needs and fulfill them. And if you map out those 4 spaces and see which Palestinians are doing that work the best, you will have, I would say, your first blueprint of what the future of Palestine is. And then all you have to do is organize people and resources and strategy around them.
Thank you. Thank you. Diana, let's go back to the Free Marwan campaign and what you were saying, he's our Nelson Mandela. First of all, what are the chances of Marwan being freed? I mean, Israel reacts by sending him back to the torture room. Let's say he is released, right? Will that give us an opportunity to do what Fadi was saying earlier, which is start with the liberation movement as opposed to try to dismantle the existing structures? Or would that make us perhaps fall into the trap of yet working through the existing structure, be that the PLO or Fatah or whatever?
Look, at this point, we don't know. At this point, we really don't know because he's been in prison over the course of the past 23 years. He hasn't been allowed to speak to the public for quite a long time. He hasn't been allowed to speak to his wife or to his kids for a very, very, very long time. And so we haven't really heard. At the same time, we do know what his political beliefs are, and we do know that unlike what we're seeing right now, where political figures are being imposed on us, everyone from Trump and the people that he's going to be appointing in Gaza to Hussein al-Sheikh in the West Bank, we do know that he's somebody who believes in elections, who's going to be pushing for elections. He's a figure who is known. And even though he's been in prison for 23 years, and most Palestinians are not over the age of 23, most of them are young, many of them still know him despite the Palestinian Authority not pushing for him, despite the fact the Palestinian Authority has not pushed for him. So we don't know, but we do know that he's somebody who people are aware of. He's a uniting figure. And I think that he will be somebody who will be pushing for elections. He'll be somebody who'll be pushing to unite the diaspora. And I don't think he's been so content with the existing structures.
Yeah, thank you. We have 3 minutes left. And so I'm going to try to avoid a dangerous question, even though you handled those so incredibly well. And what you say is so important for all of us to hear, really. If there is a takeaway for me, it is the importance of thinking of collective grassroots leadership, amplifying Palestinian voices, refusing to be complicit with conversations that either proactively or de facto quash Palestinian voices, right? Refusing to be spoken for. So my last question is, the question of liberation, what does that mean to you, Fadi, and then what does that mean to you, Diana?
I think you have a knack for dangerous questions, even when you try not to ask them. But I actually don't want to speak on behalf of Fadi and what liberation means to me. I want to speak on behalf of listening to thousands of Palestinians across the last 2 years, from Gaza to the West Bank to 1948 to the diaspora, and actually asking this question seriously. And what we found is that there is Palestinian consensus around 4 key concepts. The first is the idea of unity of land, which is that the homeland of the Palestinian people is from the river to the sea. Palestinians see that all as part of their ancestral homeland, part of where they want to live, part of where their future is. The second is unity of people, which is that all 15 million Palestinians, and it's actually very moving when you ask a Palestinian in Santiago, Chile, who's a third generation in Chile, and a Palestinian in Khan Yunis in Gaza, or a Palestinian in Jaffa, and you ask them, do you feel more or less Palestinian than X? And they all say, no, like we're all Palestinian. The Palestinian in Santiago may have not been back here for 80 years, but he's just as Palestinian as I am. So liberation is about the future of those 15 million Palestinians. And then you have the idea of values. And it's when you speak with Palestinians, whether their leanings are conservative, Islamists, or Marxist leftists, when you have deliberative conversations with them, the same values come out, which is they want a future of dignity where all people can feel empowered in themselves and not humiliated, a future of freedom where Palestinians control their destiny and define the rules that govern them, and those rules are not defined by the occupation or any other body. And last but not least, justice, which is a system of fairness for all. And I want to say that this vision of Palestinians that Palestinians speak to, it's not a vision that has any form of ethnic or religious supremacy. When we speak to Palestinians, they believe that these values, freedom, justice, dignity, should be values that are present for all people living within the Holy Land. And I think if we can create that future together, and it's a difficult task, but it's not impossible, then we will achieve a liberation that not only frees Palestinians from the shackles of occupation and apartheid and colonialism they faced, it will also free a significant portion of Jewish people from the weaponization of fear that has also governed them through the system of Zionism and made them consistently feel like they must always be persecuted. So liberation for me is not just the Palestinian liberation, but the liberation of everybody on the ground. And I think, lastly, and this is maybe very ambitious, but I do think the liberation of Palestine will also reverberate across the world and liberate many people who face different forms of oppression. I think people connect to Palestine because whether you are a woman or whether you are an African American or whether you are someone living in the global south under poverty, you can see your struggle and yourself in the struggle of Palestinians. So maybe, just maybe, the liberation of Palestine will be the liberation of us all.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Fadi. And Diana, you've said that before, the liberation of Palestine is the liberation of the world, and you invoked Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela said 30 years ago, we are not free until the Palestinian people are free. Liberation.
I'm going to get a little personal if I can.
Please.
Okay. So, being a Palestinian living in 48 is not easy. I live amongst people who, over the course of the past 2 years, have done everything from wishing me death to actually sending me death threats, rape threats, stalked me, you name it. These are people who, let's just say it's been difficult. I don't want to get more personal than that. And thank you for giving me a space here. And at the same time, I'm somebody who has had the privilege, because I was born in Canada, of living in the West Bank, and I've also lived in Gaza. And why am I saying this? Because I've been to all parts of Palestine. And so for me, I wake up every morning, I swear, I wake up every morning, and I imagine Palestine free, because that's the only thing you can do to keep living in Palestine, in 48 Palestine. It's the only way you can keep surviving, is by imagining a free Palestine. That's it. So what does it look like for me? I think about the people I've met over my lifetime who say to me, who are part of, for example, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, who've never seen Al-Aqsa. I think about my friends who are from the West Bank who ask me what the sea looks like. I think about my friends from Gaza who ask me what Al-Aqsa looks like. I think about, and who have a picture of it in their house. I think about my friends from Gaza who ask me what Nablus looks like. So for me, liberation looks like this. My friends from Gaza coming to visit me in my home in Haifa rather than us coming to Doha to see one another. It looks like my very best friend from Ramallah coming to visit me and have a meal with me in my house in Haifa. She's never been to my house, ever. It looks to me like my friends in Ramallah visiting my other friends in Gaza, and vice versa. And all of us enjoying life and never having to be on the front page of the newspaper again, except for our excellence. That's what liberation looks like to me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.